Lyle, hey, congratulations on Death and Bowling.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Not a problem. Hey, so it's premiering at Outfest this year, and um, how how does it feel to have your movie being at the prestigious film festival?
It's a huge honor. I'm a huge fan and supporter of Outfest. It's also great because I made the film for queer and trans people, and I think a festival like this, we're gonna find that type of audience. And for the premiere, that's just gonna be like very magical. Death and Bowling was sort of a love letter to other trans people, so I'm very excited for it to find an audience.
Well, let's start with the easy question for you then. Where the original idea for Death and Bowling came from?
Well, okay, I was working through some themes of like grief and loss and wanted to make a film that dealt with those themes without it being overly literal or about my life or a documentary or something like this. But the theme of bowling really came out of yeah, just this formal idea of just the structure of a bowling ball. It has three holes, and so do trans men. So I found this like campy connection between it. And then furthermore, the Lavender League, the women on that bowling team, they're part of a generation that I think the aesthetics of the bowling alley and the sort of like retro nostalgic colors, the sort of 80s, 90s vibes really speaks to. So I wanted to walk a line between aesthetics of my queer generation and then also speak to something we can imagine being tied to the world of the people we're seeing on screen.
Wow. So let's talk about bowling. Is there actually a transgender bowling league out there?
I'm sure that there is, though this is not based on one that I am, a part of or aware of or something like this.
No, it was just kind of funny. It was just going, that would be actually interesting if there was an all transgender league. So in this case, was it easy to find, an all trans? Is this an all transgender cast that you actually utilize in your film?
It's like a majority trans cast, and the reason I did it like that is that I wanted it to be possible for trans actors to participate and not immediately be outed as trans. So by and large, let's say yes, but there are some exceptions. Yeah.
So when I know this is an independent film, did they basically your cast members had to dress themselves for the parts for this film?
Actually, I had two really talented costume designers, Sajine Gonzalez and Cody Moses Morris, who worked with us on set and put together the vast majority of the costume design for the characters. And thank God also because we had a huge cast, so I definitely needed them there to get people in and out of their gear for sure. We were independent, but yeah, all told, cast and crew, we had a team of like more than 40 people. So it was a pretty gigantic, like 5-week long production. So even though it was independent, it looked very professional in certain ways. And we had for sure a full size crew for a feature film.
40 people is quite a lot for an independent film, but yeah. 5-week production, it's also a long time for that's including editing, or it's not including editing?
Oh my God, editing, it's like a 3-year project. Yeah, just shooting.
Well, let's talk about your two main leads. You had Will and Tracy as your two main leads in this film. Why were they perfect?
Why were they perfect? Well, so here's something you should maybe know about the casting process. Is I worked with a lot of actors who either had limited experience acting in TV and film work, or no experience at all. And that was an intentional choice on my part as the director, because I wanted the actors to deliver very particular, like staged, pretty artificial theatrical performance. And I wanted to be able to work with them to establish that performance style and have it be consistent. But also, Alex and X, those characters, Will and Tracy, became them. And I think this sort of speaks to a lot of the cast. I had a script written and I had characters written, but a lot of what developed was sort of like a dialectic between who the actors actually were and what they brought to the screen, like even autobiographically. and what was on the page. So part of why they're perfect is that there was like a synergistic development of what existed from the script phase, and I credit that to Will and Tracy.
Doesn't this make it more difficult to actually direct when when you have more inexperienced actors, or do you try to nurture them throughout the entire process?
I think it sort of depends on the style you're working in. So my style of directing so far, I really like working with so-called non-actors, partly because they don't have the same sort of traditional training. So you're not working again. I think a lot of what Hollywood expects is like very realistic, very realist performances that are supposed to read a certain way on screen, and you're supposed to have dialogue that's paced in the way you and I are speaking right now. And I find it actually easier to communicate with someone who doesn't have the same expectations of how they're supposed to perform, and to work together to sort of create a very unique project. I do very much look forward to in the future working with professional actors for sort of different reasons. So I think it just depends on the project, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So for like a project like this, because they had to develop their own synergies, was there a lot of improv going on, or you try to make them stick to the script as much as possible?
Less improv than you'd think, but I think it's more like, let's say a line was delivered and it's not, to the letter. I might say, great, let's do that for 1 or 2 more takes. And then, Will, I'd like you to say that, here's the intention behind the line. I want you to say it how Will Crisanda would say it. And then we sort of see, okay, what fit better for the character. And obviously the character then shifts and develops sort of according to those lines. So it's not so much that we didn't have time to do a ton of improv. That would have been like a month, already with a 5-week shoot. Yeah, we definitely needed to stick to the script in some ways, but it was loose in that way because I wanted to allow for the magic of sort of the actors to bring themselves to the project.
Most excellent. So does this mean the rest of the cast, you recruited them the same way? You try to look for, with less experience or no experience to be in a part of this movie, like your bowling league?
Sort of a mix. I mean, D'Lo, who plays Gio the Butcher in the film, he's a screen actor. He's had a long career and he has a ton of experience acting in front of a camera. And I just felt like I wanted him to be a part of the project, and he was a perfect fit for Gio and brought something unique to the character. So it's not a by and large like across the board practice. It's also, we're at a sort of turning point with trans representation now, and I think it's really valuable to bring on actors who haven't had the big roles and who are excited about doing a project that's sort of, a little bit more experimental. Also, we just need to see more people. So I didn't want to pick from the same sort of group that we've seen before in lots of other projects. And also, I'm not sure they would have worked with me as a first-time director. So, there's a couple of forces going on here.
So speaking of, how was your overall experience as a first-time director making this your feature film debut?
It was very magical. I mean, I particularly liked shooting. I'm a director who likes being on set, and I like being in production. It was also very painful. I mean, it was a difficult 4-year project, start to finish, from writing the first line of the film to finally making a DCP and saying we're completely done just earlier this year. So we had some roadblocks. Our first world premiere was canceled because of COVID a year and a half ago. It was a long haul getting the funding together for this project, and I think it's it can be an uphill battle. I think particularly for queer and trans first-time directors. I was in my late 20s when I started. I'm now in my 30s, so it was magical. I'm very excited to in the future have a little bit more institutional support behind me and not be just getting the pedals going while pedaling uphill for the first time. But given that it was my first feature, I mean, I'm completely hooked, and I think I definitely picked the right career. So,
for in the past few years, queer cinema has been picking up significantly. But I after watching this, I was thinking, going, there's not a lot of trans films out there as a subcategory of queer cinema. Why do you think that is? Why is it slower to progress?
Well, I think a couple reasons. I mean, I think there are a lot of trans films out there. I just think, the sort of the odds are pit against us for independent work that's trans because it's difficult to get funding. It's difficult to find the support, I think, because of transphobia. I mean, I also just think like really long history of misrepresentation of trans people in media. I think Sam Feder's documentary Disclosure deals really, really well with this history. But I think furthermore, like Death and Bowling deals, it's in some way, yeah, it's a meta critique on transmasculine representation in particular. And when I was sitting in the editing room with my executive producer, Reese Ernst, this last summer, and we're sort of like brainstorming, like, okay, what exactly is the body of work that we're critiquing, that this trans actor, we can imagine him being in these films, he's playing these stereotypes and all these features. And we were like, we can't even name one feature aside from maybe Maggots and Men, Carrie Cronenweth's feature film that starred, transmasculine people playing transmasculine people. And so it's sort of like this film comes a little bit before its time, and that it's speaking to a moment that I think is arriving, but particularly for transmasculine people is not here yet. We're not seeing like a plethora of performances of transmasculine lives. It's sad, but I think the exciting thing is that it's happening, and I think there's a lot of trans artists like really thirsty to make work like this.
For yourself, was it more or less difficult to keep this movie around the 1 hour mark? Because usually now these days, movies are typically about 90 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a funny question. I mean, I think part of my process was finding exactly the story we were going to, ultimately tell as we went through production and editing. And I think maybe a lesson I learned as a first-time director is to keep it simple. And so keeping it around the 60-minute mark, actually, it wasn't that I wanted to aim for that in the edit or that was a format or something that I wanted to stick to. It's more like Death and Bowling was really served, I think, by keeping it sort of short. I'm really inspired by the German director Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who, for audiences who don't know, is queer German. He made maybe like 37 films during his career. He's a previous generation, and he was really inspired by melodrama and films by Douglas Sirk that ultimately like just took a clothes hanger that was so simple, like a love story or a tragedy or a story about loss, and then hung very complex political themes and ideas on it. I think when he had that turning point toward melodrama, he became wildly successful and reached a wider audience. So I'm trying to put my work in that place. And I think sometimes the shorter format, not a short, but a shorter feature, allows for a simple story to sort of express very complex themes.
Tell us about that bowling song that you put input into the film.
This is such an example of the sort of improv nature that you were asking about earlier. That character Matilda is played by Gillian Cameron, the woman who's singing at the end of the film. We're like in the middle of a shoot in the bowling alley, and I think maybe like my script supervisor or someone came up to me and sort of tugged my arm and was like, "You need to hear Gillian's song. She just wrote a song about bowling." And so like we paused. And she started singing, and I was like, we needed to add a shot today, guys, and set this up. And we just did it in one take, and it ended up being like so incredible. So, yeah.
You know what's actually interesting was there's like little things that I actually noticed, through your entire movie, especially like the production sets. There was a scene where X was sitting in his living room and the pictures were upside down. Or there was another scene in the bedroom and you had a stuffed dog on the floor. And I figure all that was purposeful, right?
Yes. There's not a lot in this film that was not purposeful. Those portraits that are hanging upside down, I think this is a little more legible on a larger screen, but maybe you saw this on, I don't know how you watched, but it's like one of the images is of Hilary Swank upside down, and these are all cis actors who played trans characters in feature films. And so the idea is that X sort of has like a sort of sick upside down shrine to these representations of himself that he's then reproducing over and over and over again ad nauseum. So, and then, yeah, I mean, you notice the stuffed dog, in Gio's butcher shop, he's surrounded by meat that hopefully is definitely not something you should put in your mouth, or it shouldn't look real. But I wanted these layers of like artificiality to sort of speak also to like what gender is. I just felt like I'm making a trans film. There's such an impulse in trans media activism right now to like offer truth, authenticity, representation. And while it would be amazing for me, I want to like gift my 16-year-old self at like all girls private school in Connecticut some like films with trans men on screen providing that representation. I also think there's space for like fiction and experimentation, and for having fake meat hanging on a wall to kind of remind you like we're not trying to offer you something ethnographical here. And also, I don't think there's a truth or a realness to gender, and I think what transness can kind of offer actually is that a little bit more looseness rather than an affirmation that like transness is just as real as cisgenderness. I actually just think it would be better to wipe the slate a little clean.
Well, that's great. Now, a lot of people will try to figure out, well, you know what, maybe it was just my question, but why is the main character's name X? Was there a significant meaning behind that?
Kind of. I mean, it's a little bit of a reference to like chromosomes and playing, in a sort of hopefully self-aware way with that. But also, X marks the spot on Susan's treasure map. The idea of an X is something that you follow to, but maybe there's nothing there in the end. And then also, you write an X when you get a strike in bowling. And then if you say the word X out loud, it could also be spelled EX and describes like a formerness. And I think the film deals a lot with like who we were in the past and who we become. So I thought it tied things up really nicely, and also suggested like a blank center. There's such an impulse again to provide like accurate trans representation and have a strong protagonist lead. And I think, my impulse a little bit was to keep him like a little bit of an empty planet around which the rest of the film orbits, particularly because he has this mirroring dynamic with Alex, who's actually given a name. He knows who he is. So that's why. Yes, there was some meaning.
Well, now you got death and bowling out of the way. Are you and it looks like you got great taste of directing and writing. Are there upcoming projects that that's in your head or already on the works for you?
Yeah, I'm in a project development, script screenwriting phase for what I hope will become my second feature, which, to keep it sort of simple and brief, I'd like to do sort of a trans retelling or retake on the original Pinocchio fable with the whole like I'm a real boy concept. So it'll be a wooden marionette who wishes on a star, but it's become real, and wakes up as an adult transgender man who has to sort of like navigate our world. So that's what I'm working on now.
Excellent. Well, let me wrap it up with one last question for you, Lyle. How's your bowling?
I am so bad at bowling. It's ridiculous, but queer failure. It's like so formally beautiful.
That is terrific. Well, Lyle, hey, congratulations once again for Death and Bowling, and thank you for carrying this conversation with us about your wonderful first film.
Thank you so much, Gig. Thanks for making the time.